Hey there, welcome to YouTube. If you are into poetry, if you are into literature, if you are into cultural history, then you've come to the right place. Cardboard Box Productions makes podcasts about all those things, so be sure to click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you never miss a new episode. Obviously, we mostly make podcasts, so you can also go to anywhere you get your podcasts, if it's a place other than YouTube, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and you can subscribe to our podcast feeds there. All right, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to Close Talking, the world's most popular poetry analysis podcast from Cardboard Box Productions Incorporated. I am co-host Jack Rossiter Munley, and with my good friend Connor McNamara Stratton, we read a poem,
talk about the poem,
and read the poem again.
Before we get into today's selection, a quick note that if you like what we do here at Close Talking and have a spare minute of your time, it would mean the world to us if you would give the podcast a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Those ratings and reviews help boost us up the algorithm and find new listeners.
And if you have suggestions for future episodes or comments on this one, you can send us an email at closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com.
And you can also find us on social media. On Twitter, the show is @CloseTalking. I am @Jack Rossiter Munn, and Connor is @Connor M. Stratton. On Instagram, the show is @CloseTalkingPoetry, and on Facebook, it's facebook.com/CloseTalking. We also have a website, closetalking.com, where you can find all the past episodes of the show, and Cardboard Box Productions has just launched a newsletter, Unboxed, and if you go to cardboardboxproductionsinc.com, you can subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stuff on Close Talking and all of the other literary and cultural history podcasts that Cardboard Box Productions makes. On with the show.
All right. Yeah, I hope you have ideas about this one. I mean, I have some ideas, but...
I am Jack Rossiter Munley, and this is...
Connor McNamara Stratton.
All three names. We are two guys with six names who love poetry. Connor is an MFA student at the University of...
Minnesota. Yeah.
And I am someone with a USB microphone and a dream.
Anne is a freelance writer based in New York City. We are
also
in
technically true.
Jack's lovely abode here in Staten Island.
That's true. If you hear any cats, those are my cats. They're perfect cats. I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
Even if they are scamps. And today we are talking about a poem that Connor selected, the title of which is amazing, the content of which is challenging, and we're going to dive right in.
Yeah. It's really something. No, I picked this. I love this poet, Sun Yung Shin. She's cool though. She lives in Minneapolis. You read her book.
Nice. Which book?
Rough and Savage, which
Ooh.
This is not in, I don't think, but it's a crazy book. It was like the first book we read, and we were like, oh my god, this is so hard, difficult. And then we would like ask her like what was going on in the book, and she was like, well, it's like language is hard, and
sounds like she got her point across.
Yeah, and like colonialism and stuff. And,
okay, that's also hard.
Yeah, which was also tough. I sort of picked it because I feel like it's very difficult for me to access, and so I thought maybe we could try to access it together.
That's what we're here for.
So anyway, it's called Orphanotrophia, which I looked that up, and that's the plural of Orphanotrophium, which was an ancient orphanage.
Right?
Yeah. And the whole poem is, general context is about like the black market of adoptions in Korea. That's kind of like, anyway, good to know that, I think, before diving in. Anyway, so this is Orphanotrophia by Sun Yung Shin. A broad black market. The women are urnfields. The children are binding out. Dark in the trains, a burning mouth to eat a shovelful of black diamonds. Leak blood, trickle milk, time weeps, going over the falls, washing to shore, done and undone, law and order over the falls. Body paint, black ink and brush, state and subject, eat silver and sugar, tobacco hair and a hospital all in gold leaf, baby Jesus in the alley, bright baby in a bullet. Time branching everywhere like hair, custody this antebellum apprentice, rows of graves, keep spilling the liquor, city of the dead, written from right to left. The women stand image and likeness. The women occur copy and heir. The children recorded a homestead of lung and eye, museums of burials, the underground of giving birth to birth.
Wow.
Whew. Yeah.
A lot going on in that poem.
A lot going on. Yeah.
So the thing that sticks out to me, you start off. What sticks out to you in this poem?
I guess there's a few things that I can't quite connect. So one I think unifying aspect of the poem is the sort of lack of apparent speaker behind the words. So we're not given a poem where like you can locate the poet or the speaker in the poem like in a location talking. It's kind of like just this like lyric incantation of very striking images. And I think that's one of the parts that make it difficult to access. It sticks out because it's trying to, I think, articulate a system and an experience of this sort of underground adoption happening that has been happening in Korea and is still happening, and from what little I know is pretty awful process that then on the other side you get like a bunch of like Western women who are wealthy and then have these like beautiful Korean babies or whatever and talk about it like nice things or something. So anyway, and this is kind of like trying to articulate like the sort of where it's actually happening and what it's actually like. Yeah,
I have to say, the first time I read this poem, not having Connor's helpful contextual comment that it is about the Korean trade in children, I had ideas, but I had no way of putting them together. Really, just from just reading the poem.
Right.
It was a very evocative poem.
Yeah.
It was very emotional.
Yeah.
But I didn't necessarily have any unity. And in reading it again and in hearing Connor read it just now, knowing that, to me, it is sort of an impressionistic story of what happens to the women and the children when this goes on. So you're sort of set up at the beginning that there's a broad black market and the women are urnfields, the children are binding out. So the women are, like, when I hear for urnfields, it's like they're, meant to be growing things within them, basically. That's a womb. And then the children are getting sort of bound up and sent away. And then throughout the rest of the poem, it to me reads a little bit like what that journey is like for the two of them, and what it means for the mothers is that they give birth and then they're sort of discarded. And the children go on to have this really strange experience of being sent overseas and end up
in a hospital all in gold leaf.
Right.
Just another sort of pattern in the poem that, when I read these and I kind of like, some poems have sort of narrative continuity and you can sort of follow a story. Some poems have, like a expositional continuity, I think, are
I think Urban Renewal by Komnyaka has that, where you're sort of tracking one image. This has a subject continuity, but it lacks a clear narrative. It lacks a clear sort of scene or setting that we're following.
Right, yeah, 1 minute we're on a train, 1 minute we're in a hospital, another minute we're with the women, before they're ever pregnant. Like, it hops all over the place.
And so when those things are lacking, I kind of go to like rhythmic or structural patterns that I find. And one thing that's happening throughout is this kind of like dual thing, like this and this, that's happening, like sort of sometimes binary, like oppositions, but that happens throughout. So we have done and undone, law and order, black ink and brush, state and subject, silver and sugar, tobacco hair and a hospital, and then that line, baby Jesus in the alley, bright baby and a bullet. And the women stand image and likeness, copy and heir, lung and eye. So there's, and then it concludes with the underground of giving birth to birth. So I think one kind of like energy in the poem is the tension between two things paired together, and I think that begins with the image that you pointed out in the beginning. The women are urnfields. That urnfield as a womb is such a condensed sort of binary, where you have, that's the site of birth, the site of life, but urnfield is like, you have ash, you have death. So I think that's something
that's very true. And you also, in reading Urnfields, I see it as just like a lot.
Yeah.
It indicates immediately also that this is a system. This is systemic. It's not a woman who's giving birth. We're not hearing the story of a woman and a child. We're hearing a story of women in a black market and children who are then sent away. Like, it's that one word really does set up sort of all the contesting content of the poem.
Right. Which is why, if I had to speculate, why I think Sun Yung Shin avoids a kind of narrative continuity or a setting continuity, because I think she is trying to articulate the systemic, and that's very difficult to do when you're focusing on like one woman's individual experience.
What's really interesting also is that she's going after a system that she clearly has a lot of issues with, and that she's almost in sort of railing against the system by describing it. She's also deconstructed it in the way that she talks about it. She's sort of broken it up and smashed it into these disparate impressionistic parts, but it's in a way it's her way of destroying that system narratively. There is a clear progression in what actually happens for kids are born in Korea, they're sent over to the United States, they're adopted. That's a clear progression.
Right.
It's one she disagrees with, and in disagreeing with it, the way she's chosen to describe it is to completely destroy it, which is almost an implicit argument in the poem then.
Yeah, totally.
Which I think is kind of neat.
And there are just some, I don't know, there's like just small parts that are just so strange syntactically, like the women occur, copy, and heir is such a intense phrase. Like, occur as a transitive verb is highly unusual. Like, you could say the women occur, or like this thing occurred, but to occur something is like weird. Can't say that.
It's very odd, yeah. Well, I think it's interesting that you have the women stand image and likeness.
Yeah.
The women occur, copy, and heir.
Yeah.
And occur, it's such a strange use of that word, but it does make it seem like these women just sort of happen.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if in one line she's describing one group of women and in one line another, or is she talking about the same women? What are your thoughts?
Right. That was kind of what I was thinking, is like you have perhaps the first
first line, the women stand image and likeness. That's the mothers who are giving birth to the kids that will be adopted, and the women occur, copy, and heir are the Western mothers who are adopting.
That's sort of what I was thinking,
Yeah.
because I think, again, like, the women occur in just happening. Like, it's reasonable to think that women could be adopting babies never knowing what was going
Yeah.
on before. They just sort of happen into perpetuating the system without any knowledge of what they're doing with their actions. They're just
Right.
adopting, they're just adopting a baby.
Yeah, right, and I think one other part that the poem gets at, and I should do more research on how it actually happens, but like, I would imagine from the person adopting's perspective, all you are encountered with is this one life of the baby. But I think what the poem is suggesting is there are so many, I think, babies and mothers dying in this black market.
Right.
You have the urnfields again, you have rows of graves, city of the dead, museums of burials.
The underground of giving birth to birth, which is saying that this is sort of how the people who are actually giving birth to the second birth of adoption
Right.
are living, and this is that experience that is in many ways erased by this system that just sort of occurs
Right.
in the iteration that we see in the
Right.
West.
Yeah.
One thing I do want to return to quickly is the going over the falls.
Mm-hmm.
What do we think about that? Because that, if I'm not mistaken, is the only image that gets repeated.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly in that way. So the stanza in which that occurs, second stanza, and it's mostly quatrains. The first stanza has 5 lines, but just FYI. But the second stanza goes, leak blood, trickle milk, time weeps, going over the falls, washing to shore, done and undone, law and order over the falls. Yeah, no, I know. It's...
Because in looking at the poem more and more, it sticks out. And so leak blood and trickle milk, I go to motherhood with that.
Yeah.
The bloody practice of giving birth, and then milk to sustain life. Time weeps. In time, the motherhood of these women becomes something that's very difficult, challenging, sad for them, for their children, and then going over the falls. So where it's then reiterated, washing to shore, done and undone, that's maybe the journey of heading across the sea to the West, law and order, the way things should be. A mother gives birth and raises her child, or the natural order, or the order
or the
of
legal adoption system.
Exactly, like the legal adoption system, or the laws of whatever country. Over the falls. So going over the falls is almost like this experience of moving beyond what should be and what is meant to be, and like going over the falls into this black market. You fall into
and I
system.
And I do think it does refer a little bit also to those 3 images in the first, where you have blood leaking, milk trickling, time weeping. These are all falling things, essentially. Those are all verbs of falling, and of fluid. So we have falls, which we think of a waterfall essentially, but I think in the plural, I think that's suggesting all those little waterfalls of blood leaking and milk trickling and time weeping.
Definitely. Neato.
Yeah. I know.
All right. Do you want to read it again?
I think we have to. I mean, there's much more, but that's all I got right now. Orphanotrophia. A broad black market. The women are urnfields. The children are binding out. Dark in the trains, a burning mouth to eat a shovelful of black diamonds. Leak blood, trickle milk, time weeps, going over the falls. Washing to shore, done and undone. Law and order over the falls. Body paint,
black ink and brush, state and subject, eat silver and sugar, tobacco hair and a hospital all in gold leaf, baby Jesus in the alley, bright baby in a bullet, time branching everywhere like hair, custody this antebellum apprentice, rows of graves, keep spilling the liquor, city of the dead, written from right to left. The women stand image and likeness. The women occur copy and heir. The children recorded a homestead of lung and eye, museums of burials, the underground of giving birth to birth.
I almost wonder if that last stanza, rather than talking about the women in the West, maybe it's saying that the history is written in the West, so it's written from right to left, the way that you would write in the West, and then that last part is how the system works. Like, that's how it's recorded. These women are just image and likeness. They're just copies, replicable mothers who are there to send children. They're recorded. They're given a homestead. And then in the ordering of the West, the history of museums is the history of categorizing other cultures and other, like, the natural world. These museums of burials are the underground. They're pushed underground in the West.
Oh, yeah.
That's my other thought on that last bit. Just because it's set up by the cities of the dead, or city of the dead, written from right to left, that's almost setting up that this is how it's going to get recorded.
Right.
And the way it's recorded is to devalue what's going on. And yes, there's all this burial, but the way that it's put together is that it's the underground, and how this all works. It's pushed away. It's pushed down.
Yeah. Right. Right. Burying as both death and, like, erasure in terms of not visible anymore. I like that thought.
All right, and with that we have concluded another highly successful episode of Close Talking.
We're killing it.
This is co-host Jack Rossiter Munley. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review. 5 stars maybe? Those reviews help with the algorithm and are a great way for us to find new listeners. And you can put anything in them. You can write whatever you want. You can just say, oh, this is a good podcast. I like this podcast. You could be like, hey, that Connor guy, he makes a lot of good points. Jack, why is he doing this outro so long? You know, get him off the mic. And whatever you feel like writing, head on over there, 5 stars, drop in the review. Do you have thoughts about this poem? Is there a poem or poet you'd like us to cover on a future episode? Well, we'd love to hear from you. And there are tons of ways that you can get in touch with us. I mean, I guess you could drop it into an iTunes review. You could be like, 5 stars. Hey, why don't you talk about insert name of poet here? But you can also send us an email. That's probably the best way to do it. closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com is our email address. Or you can find us on Twitter. I am at Jack Rossiter Munn. Connor is at Connor M. Stratton. And the show is at Close Talking. On Instagram, you can find us there too. We are at Close Talking Poetry. And we are on Facebook at facebook.com/Close Talking. We haven't gotten to TikTok yet, and we might never. Who knows? Anything is possible. Speaking of all those social media platforms, a very special thank you to our incredible social media manager, Corey Chena, who keeps us active across the internet. And a thank you to all of you for listening. We will see you next time.